it's like a content zombie apocalypse. And Karen McGrane, author of Content Strategy for Mobile, is going to talk about just that. Warm welcome.
You want to know what I think is amazing? It is the fantastic team here at LavaCon. I want to say thank you to everybody who helped organize, everybody who's here in New Orleans, everybody who's visiting remotely. You want to know what else? You want to know what else I think is even more amazing? It's print. Man, print is such a fantastic technology. I mean, you put the words on the paper and they stay there. You don't have to worry about keeping it updated all the time. And you know, when you look back at like, what is it, the 500 years of the printing press and the thousands of years of technology that we have to put ink on paper, you realize just how much of our values, our culture, our process, like what it means to create connections, to create hierarchy, to create meaning, are all derived from putting ink on paper. And then we had to go and invent the web, which, I mean, on balance, I think it was totally worth it, but man, is it a pain in the ass. So the web just turned, 25 or so. Opinions vary about how old the web is, but when you look back at the very foundations of this technology, hypertext markup language, HTML, the uniform resource locator, the URL, those technologies were created with the explicit purpose that anyone, anywhere, could create a document that could be updated instantaneously and accessible globally. And I mean, when you just kind of take a step back from the day-to-day stuff we do every day and stop and appreciate just how different that is from print, 25 years isn't nearly enough time for human beings to have wrapped their heads around the ways that the web is different. And so when I talk about content strategy for mobile, the title of my book, I don't mean how do you get your stuff to work on a smartphone. What I mean is how do we, as human beings, adapt to the fact that now we can no longer make any assumptions at all about the size of someone's screen, about the amount of bandwidth that they're going to have, about the input mechanism that they're using to connect. All of those assumptions are gone, and they're never coming back. And so when I talk about content strategy for mobile and now for tablets, what I mean is that we as human beings are having to wrap our heads around the idea that we have to figure out how to create content that can work on any platform or any device. Now, I am not a futurist. I am not going to be the one who stands here and tells you what the next big thing is. If I could do that, I would be making a fortune. But I can guarantee you one thing, and it's this. Humanity's drive for new technology has not yet been sated. There will be a next big thing. And whatever that next big thing is, we're going to have to figure out how do we get our stuff onto it. Maybe the next big thing is audio interfaces, right? I work with a lot of clients these days that are dealing with the reality of how do they adapt to a world of audio interfaces and chat. And, I find that when I ask people, what does it mean to create content for different devices? Sometimes I'll talk to web developers and I'll get this sense of like, Karen, why do we have to worry about semantic markup? I mean, what difference does it make if I encode something with the italics tag or with the emphasis tag when every major browser since the dawn of time has rendered emphasis as italics? Well, not in an audio interface, they don't. One of those things, as you know, conveys visual styling. The other conveys meaning. In an audio interface, emphasis would be rendered as tone of voice. And so when you start peeling that back, when you start realizing the degree to which we rely on visual styling to convey meaning and how poorly that translates across platforms, you realize how much of that we are still wrestling with how to unpack. I don't know when audio interfaces are really, truly gonna hit the mainstream. If it's 5 years, 15 years, 50 years. But I do know that one day the Star Trek computer is gonna be real. And the last thing that I want when I go and ask the Star Trek computer a question is for it to start spitting back at me, http://. So audio interfaces, potentially the next big thing. Surely though, the next big thing is watches, right? I just got my 4th generation Apple Watch, and ever since watches came out, I've had people telling me, like, Karen, come on, I mean, a watch is not really a content consumption device. Who's ever gonna wanna read a long document on their watch? That may be true, but that's also the same thing that we said about phones. Now, I've got a web browser on my watch, and even if I totally concede the point that no one actually wants to read on their watch, if you envision the watch as a hub of a smart ecosystem, in which the watch might be a controller for a smart TV or an audio interface, where the watch might be something that would allow you to navigate through something that's in your ears. It makes you realize that the content ecosystem has to be renderable and navigable through the smallest of form factors, even if that's not a primary consumption channel. But watches, obviously, they're so tiny. Surely not the next big thing. Surely the next big thing is gonna be stadium scoreboards, right? We're gonna get our content where everybody can see it. This is a joke. I put this in here as a joke. I thought it was funny. You know, because like watches are tiny and then scoreboards are big. And then I talked to a client who said that the biggest challenge that they're facing today is digital signage. So it's a university client, and they just bought all these signs that they wanted to put up all over campus. And they came to me and said, Karen, we have a website, we have mobile apps, and now we have these digital signs. And what we want is a way that we can create content in one place and then have it automatically publish out to these 3 very different form factors. And I was like, hey, have you thought about treating those digital signs like they're a completely separate silo and managing them independently? And they were like, we don't have time for that. No. We've got things like events and news for students and campus alerts, and we want to make sure that our content can be automatically published out to wherever our students will need it. This isn't some weird futuristic scenario these people are operating under. This is a real problem they are really trying to solve right now, today. And if that's the case for them, maybe you too will face a similar problem in your own home with your internet refrigerator, right? Huh? Can't talk about the future without talking about the internet refrigerator. It's like, I think the biggest problem facing our society right now today is that I can't check Twitter in the 30 seconds that it takes me to get a Diet Coke. So, no, I don't think the internet refrigerator is really the next big thing, although I will confess, I have a 1st generation iPad scotch taped to my refrigerator, and I find it extremely useful. But maybe it's not the fridge. Maybe it'll be something like an internet-enabled cooktop, where the glass surface of your range can become a place to display news or videos or recipes. Or maybe, and I do think this is the biggest problem facing our society today, what happens when toaster printers become a reality? Is your content going to be ready to be baked onto delicious toast? These are the problems that we are here to solve today together. So right now, the organizations that I work with are already struggling with how do they deal with a massive content that needs to work across a variety of platforms. They have a website. What do they do about mobile apps? Do they need to have separate tablet apps? That's on top of the fact that they've already got email and social channels. They're managing individual microsites. They have blogs that they manage. Heck, a lot of the clients that I work with are still figuring out how do they take the content that they create for print and get it onto the web. And yet tomorrow, there's going to be ever more devices and platforms and screen sizes, and it's a veritable zombie apocalypse of new places that we're gonna have to get our content to work. I wanna be clear about one thing. I don't care if you believe that any of these platforms is gonna be the next big thing. You can be like, digital signage, never gonna matter to me. Watches, no big deal. Because what I believe is that the organizations that will survive the zombie apocalypse are the organizations that will decide right now that they need to create content that has a fighting shot of being able to work on whatever device or platform or screen size that will be the next big thing in the future. And so then the question becomes, how do we protect ourselves from the zombie apocalypse? What is the stake that we can drive into the heart of siloed multi-platform design? I believe that it is the desire, the lodestar, to move towards a place where we have true separation of content from presentation, true separation of content from form. Now, I would be remiss, especially in talking to an audience like you all, if I didn't say that that is perhaps an unachievable long-term goal. It's a destination that we may never fully, completely reach. And yet, when I go out and I talk to developers about what do they think it means to separate content from form, immediately some of the audience, especially of the types of people that I talk to, are like, ooh, 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 I know the answer, I know the answer. It's CSS. CSS is the answer. Which is not untrue. But when you really dig into this problem, you realize that the challenge of creating content that is not locked to a particular output format, content that is not rendered only in one styling, that then that styling has to be stripped away later, that is a problem, a challenge that we need every person in the organization to understand and wrap their heads around and treat as a goal. When Dan Jacobson, so he's the API guy from Netflix, he's formerly from NPR, when he says that the future of content management systems is in their ability to capture the content in a clean, presentation-independent way, what he means there is something that goes beyond markup. He goes beyond something that touches all of the work that everybody who creates content does. I have developed a reputation as being the web's biggest hater of WYSIWYG interfaces. You know, the things that look, quote, just like Microsoft Word. This one says you give your content authors an editing solution that they will actually use. The Word-like interface makes content creation easy for business users who know nothing about HTML and want to keep it that way. And so instead, we give them that familiar toolbar at the top, and we say, look, you can treat this document just like Microsoft Word. You can float a box to the right, color it purple, call it table of contents, add some custom bullet points, add a table, and it will render perfectly in the one and only one platform that you were imagining when you created it, which was the desktop web. And when I look at a document like this, sometimes developers will look at this and say, oh yeah, all that formatting, you gotta strip it out. Strip it out? That was someone's whole job. When someone created that document, the problem was that she didn't want to create a purple box and float it to the right. What she wanted to do was create a table of contents. She wanted to create something that had a signposting function that provided a guideline to the various sections of the document. She wanted it to be set off from the flow of the document and provide a way for people to access things. But we didn't give her any tools to encode what that actually meant on the web. The only tools that we gave her were tools of styling. I don't mean to brag here. I really do love coming out, talk to groups of people like you all. But my graffiti crime spree is going so well. I just feel like I'm getting the message out to like a much broader group of people this way. Y'all know where WYSIWYG came from. It came from Xerox. It came from Xerox PARC. Because they invented the laser printer. Okay, think about this for a second. Xerox invented the entire concept of what you see is what you get editing. They invented the entire concept of the graphical user interface so that they could sell laser printers. See, they had a way that you could print out whatever you wanted, but you needed to be able to actually create that document. And so I would argue that in many ways, WYSIWYG is like the biggest driver of adoption of the personal computer. I mean, it is WYSIWYG and the graphical user interface that directly led to the growth of the personal computer. It directly led to the growth of the web. And frankly, it's the reason that all of us are sitting here in this room today. It's the reason that I have a job. And it's with a huge amount of respect for this mental model, this metaphor that came before us, that I feel like I can confidently stand up here now and say that the web is not a laser printer. I mean, digital technology has nothing in common with the laser printer that sits next to your desk. The amount of control that you have over layout or positioning or styling, all of those cues are meaningless in an environment where you don't even know if there's going to be a screen, and you definitely will never know what size that screen will be, how much bandwidth that screen has, or whatever tool someone's going to use to interact with it. Ted Nelson says that imitating paper on a computer screen is like tearing the wings off a 747 and using it as a bus on the highway. We can do so much more with digital, but the challenge is that we need people to understand that we can no longer encase our content in a big blob of format. I believe that we are fighting a war, and it is a war between blobs and chunks. Blobs are these big, messy, formatting-dependent, style-encoded blobs of text where if you want to go back in and strip out that content and find some way to reuse it on another platform, you have to put a huge amount of effort into cleaning it up and then restyling it. Chunks are clean, presentation-independent bits of content that are created with the expectation, with the intention, that it can and will be used on any platform. We are fighting a war, people. We cannot let the blobs win. I will leave you with these thoughts. It's been said before, I'll say it again. The web isn't print. The value systems, the processes, the tools that we have used for hundreds or thousands of years need to be adapted and grown so that human beings can understand what it truly means to create presentation-independent, independently updated, globally accessible documents. That means that the way that people create content has to change. I think it's so important for people like us all to get into a room together and talk about ways to explain the value of structured content, the value of metadata, to teams and people who are still stuck in a print-based mindset. It's only by going in and saying that we expect content creators and designers and developers to think differently about the process of creating content that we're actually going to make a change. And we have to make this change because our future depends on fighting off the zombies. We're not in the business of creating brochures or creating manuals or creating documents or magazines. We're in the business of creating content. And our job is to ensure that that content will be readable and browsable and accessible on whatever platform our customers choose to interact with it. All right, thank you all. You've been great. Have a wonderful time at the event. It's